May 1945. The battered remains of the German army fight to save Berlin from the Soviet Union's advance. Among the skeletal remains of the German forces are James Brady and Frank Stringer, two Irishmen from the west of Ireland. Around 50,000 Irishmen served the Allied war effort, but Brady and Stringer are the only two Irishmen known to have fought for the Third Reich. James Brady, from County Roscommon, and Frank Stringer, from County Leitrim, both joined the British Army in 1938 at 18 years of age. Neither man knew the other. They were part of the 1st Battalion of the Royal Irish Fusiliers and were posted to Guernsey in the Channel Islands. In the summer of 1939, in stereotypical Irish fashion, the pair became intoxicated and were involved in serious vandalising before attacking a local policeman with such force that they were charged with attempted murder. They were heard to shout, "Up the IRA" and "F*** the King" as they were led away by police. When war broke out, Germany's rapid conquest of France led to the British abandonment of the Channel Islands. Although they requested release from military prison to serve with their battalion, Brady and Stringer were refused and were subsequently captured by the Germans, taken from prison to a prisoner of war camp in northern Germany. The Germans offered Irish prisoners of war the opportunity to escape the camps and work for German intelligence. Almost all refused, but Brady and Stringer accepted. The Germans wanted agents that they could train and send back to Ireland and Britain to relay information and sabotage important targets. Although the Irishmen were considered proficient in radio training and received a wage double that of the average German worker, German intelligence doubted their potential to be effective spies. Of the few Irishmen who returned as spies, all were either captured immediately or turned into double agents. The Germans noted that some of the Irishmen preferred drinking and womanizing over training. Eventually, after exhausting the possibilities, German intelligence washed their hands of the men, and Stringer and Brady were sent to work on a farm in northern Germany in 1943. After another failed attempt to become radio operators, Frank Stringer and James Brady were given the option of further farm work, factory work, or to join the German army. Both men had become proficient in German by this time, and both opted to join the army. They were not allowed to join the Wehrmacht, however, the regular German army, and instead were drafted to the Waffen SS, Germany's elite forces notorious for their fanatical fighting spirit and often criminal behaviour. By 1944, the life expectancy of a Waffen SS officer was only 2 months. After intensive training at SS training grounds in occupied France, Brady and Stringer were handpicked for SS Jaeger Battalion 502. This unit was involved in putting down the army coup that attempted to kill Hitler and overthrow the Nazis in July 1944, as portrayed in the Tom Cruise film Valkyrie.
The Waffen SS was the military branch of the SS, and its soldiers were known for their fighting spirit. More than once, Waffen SS troops had proved their loyalty and had stood fast when the regular German army had wavered.
James Brady became involved in special operations in Romania in summer 1944, running sabotage operations behind Soviet lines. More than half of the men involved in this operation were killed in action. The Roscommon man was well thought of by his commanders and was also involved in a military operation in Budapest in October 1944 to ensure that Hungary remained in the war on Germany's side. During this time, Frank Stringer was a radio operator. The two men were reunited for Christmas 1944 when Brady returned to his unit's headquarters. At the time, the battalion was involved in an offensive against the American army in the West in what became known as the Battle of the Bulge, wearing captured American uniforms and using captured American equipment. Although the battalion was desperate for men who spoke perfect English, it was not SS policy to send their foreign recruits against Western armies.
The enemy is resourceful, desperate. The Nazi party is willing to sacrifice every building and every soul in Germany to stave off defeat.
By January 1945, the German front line on the Eastern Front was collapsing. Brady and Stringer's battalion, now called Jägerband Mitte, were deployed to the banks of the River Oder to try and hold back the Russian advance, where they were outnumbered almost 10-1. The fighting was vicious, with the Russians bombarding the Irishmen's positions with up to 500 artillery pieces in a single bombardment, and there was often hand-to-hand fighting. James Brady was wounded twice during this fighting, which saw the almost total destruction of his unit as it was trapped on the wrong side of the River Oder. The survivors had to swim across the river under heavy fire from Soviet artillery and small arms fire. the unit had suffered an almost 90% casualty rate. Although both men miraculously survived the brutal fighting, neither would see the other again. James Brady was lying wounded in a hospital in the Greater Berlin area when he was rounded up with other non-critically injured soldiers to fight in a scratch unit in the last great battle in the European theatre, the Battle of Berlin. Although details are scarce as to what part Brady played in the vicious street fighting, he was wounded for a third and final time in the service of Germany, suffering bad shrapnel injuries to his legs. He had reached the rank of sergeant in the SS. Frank Stringer was fortunate enough to be transferred with the rest of the battalion to a quiet part of the southern front in Italy before the Battle of Berlin, where it surrendered peacefully to the Allies in May 1945.
At 2:41 a.m. at General Eisenhower's headquarters, General Jodl, the representative of the German High Command, and of Grand Admiral Dönitz, the designated head of the German state, signed the act of unconditional surrender of all German land, sea, and air forces in Europe to the Allied expeditionary forces and simultaneously to the Soviet High Command.
Soldiers in the SS had to be careful who they surrendered to. The Russians often executed SS soldiers on the spot. Members of the SS could be identified by their blood group tattoos on their arms. James Brady and Frank Stringer had these tattoos. Fortunately, both men escaped this fate. Stringer surrendered to the Americans, and his true identity was immediately discovered. James Brady managed to pass as a native German prisoner of war after obtaining false papers, and was treated as such, working in France repairing war damage until late 1946 when his true identity was discovered, 16 months after the war's end. Both men were charged with treason, but their defence argued that they'd been abandoned by the British Army in 1940. The argument was also made that as Ireland is a staunchly Catholic country, both men joined the Waffen SS to fight the Russians and communism. Both men faced the death penalty, but Brady received 15 years and Stringer 14 years. The Nuremberg war trials declared the Waffen SS a criminal organisation for its role in war crimes including the execution of prisoners and civilians, genocide and brutality. There is no evidence that Brady and Stringer's unit was involved in any crimes of this nature. Evidence shows that both Stringer and Brady had been released by 1951 and had returned to Ireland, where they met with other Irishmen who had served non-combat roles in Germany during the war. However, the record ends here. Both would have been still young men, just over 30 years of age. It is quite possible that they were among the 500,000 Irishmen who emigrated between 1945 and 1960. After 1951, no record remains of the two Irishmen who began the war as young British soldiers and ended it fighting in the crumbling remains of Nazi Germany, battle-hardened by some of the most brutal fighting of the entire war.